Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 155 with Teal Swan. Now, some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she shares how we can unlock our inner clairvoyant. I also love her process to release emotions, feelings, and past pain. I loved when she talks about how to heal our inner child and childhood trauma, and when she shares about the truth about our triggers. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/155 right now. Welcome, Teal. It is so great to have you on the show. Now, I'm so excited for our conversation, and you are known as a catalyst for personal transformation. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today and how you got this title?
So my story of how I got to this position starts a long time ago. I was born on this planet with extra senses. So I'm not just seeing the physical 3D dimensional reality. I am also seeing like a blend of the other dimensional reality. So I'm the kind of person who's talking about auras, talking about dead people, talking about guides. And it didn't go well, to put it mildly, because my parents, I didn't come into a spiritual family. I came into a scientific family. And so they didn't know what to do with any of this. And unfortunately, also, my parents lived in a very religious town. They themselves weren't religious, but they were in a Mormon town and rural LDS. So, in that type of a community, is this belief that the kinds of abilities that I had were a gift of priesthood, but priesthood can only belong to men. So, if a woman or a little girl is exhibiting the traits, it's a gift of the devil. So, I was an outcast of society. And based on that type of stuff that I was doing, I caught on the radar of a person in the community who was a loose friend of the family's, who wanted to induct me into a cult based off of my capacities and use them for his own devices. So for about 13 years, I had a mentor that my parents entrusted me to, who was actually causing a lot of the issues with me that he said he was healing. And so actually, I started off my life in the spiritual work, being a person who accesses other dimensional information. So when I escaped at 19 after 13 years of very horrendous abuse that I incurred under this man and with the groups that he's affiliated with, I wanted nothing to do with spirituality at all and went into professional sports. But as the universe tends to do, it led me into a space where there was no way for me to personally expand unless I kind of re-owned that aspect. It's almost like if you're running away from a part of yourself, you're always going to keep running into a wall. So I was running into that wall, running into a wall, and I was like, all right, I have to just accept this as the reality, and it's not going away because my abilities, it's not a mind's eye thing. That's what people don't understand about extrasensory people. It's not like an intuition. I mean, you're literally walking around almost like you're in a waking hallucination state. Because it's like you're physically seeing auras. You're actually physically seeing the fact that there is no solid structure in today's world. Everything's just energy blending into one another. So I went back in the direction of that. And to my complete surprise, this was like my jam. I mean, it was crazy. I would be working with a person one on one, and I would look at the clock and realize that like 4 or 6 hours had gone by and I didn't even notice. So when things started to change for those people for the better, I started to think, maybe actually I could do something positive for people and for the world. And it was then that really things shifted for me because I hated life up to that point. Like I really didn't feel like I belonged here. I didn't have a place here. I didn't want to be on this planet. And I realized, why not just try to do something positive? Maybe that's my whole point for being here. Maybe I wasn't meant to fit in, because if I fit in, I wouldn't be changing the structures here. And some of us are just game changers. So I really embraced that idea. And for the answer about why I got this nickname of the Catalyst is because I had this little reputation for being pretty much the opposite of spiritual Novocaine. I still have that reputation. People love it and people hate it. Where, instead of being like a super inspirational speaker where you go and you sit down and somebody tells you can do it and your life is awesome and you feel good for a day and then you're back to the same stuff the next day. Like I would say things that would completely catalyze a shift within a person so that oftentimes, their life collapsed so that what could be built in the place of their life collapsing is like a way more authentic and better feeling life. But as we all know, like genuine healing doesn't always feel good. So people started referring to me as the catalyst.
So how can we tap into more of that within ourselves? Like, can we unlock our inner clairvoyant? Can we tap into these abilities within ourselves and really tune into them more? Or is it just something you're born with?
I think that people can do it. I think I'm the worst person in the world to come to for that kind of teaching, though, to tell you the honest truth. It's like, I would hope that if somebody has a natural talent, you would go to somebody else to learn how to run. Like, some of you may know Usain Bolt, right? He's somebody who can just the way he runs is incredible. Now, if somebody's got a talent like that, they may not be able to tell you how to do it because they never had to struggle with it. So this is one of those moments that I'm like literally going to say, I think there are probably other spiritual teachers in the world who could be actually better at teaching people how to tap into those types of things. I've never had to try. So, I've got my perspective on it and I can give that to you, but I just really don't think I'm the best one to go to for that type of question.
Yeah, share your perspective.
Okay, my perspective is that the more tapped into your emotions you are, the closer you get, the capacity to perceive beyond your current limitations. Most of us, when we come into this time-space reality, our emotions are actually the greatest tie we have to the multidimensional reality. For example, let's say that there are life path potentials. If you get in this car, you're going to get in a car wreck. Our emotions can go where our physical mind can't go. So the mind, let's say of the average person, can't see those life path potentials, but the emotions can. So they're the ones that are going to be like, don't get in the car, And we have lived our whole lives turning against our emotions and being sort of overriding them constantly. So the information that we're perceiving from the greater universe can't translate through our emotional field. So I feel like one of the greatest way for people to actually get into this multidimensional awareness is actually by retapping into their emotions and making it so that they're so tapped into their emotions that they start to perceive every single subtlety. And what I notice with people is that when let's say they focus on that, right? So they focus on getting in touch with that type of perception. And what happens is that that's usually heart chakra. So the heart chakra opens, or that center of receiving awareness opens to a degree where it gets maxed out. And once it gets maxed out, other aspects of you start to open to further perception. And that's when people start to get, the really awesome visions and things like that.
So how do we tap more into our emotions?
Well, I have this whole video actually on YouTube about how to feel. And in that video, what I'm presenting is the fact that, it's quite simple. You have to set your timer if you've got a real issue with your emotions. You got to set a timer every day at whatever interval seems manageable. Some people do it for 10 minutes, every 10 minutes. Some people do it every hour. Some people do it like 5 times a day. But you set your timer to go off. When it goes off, you have to do an inventory on what emotion you're feeling. But what people don't get yet and need to is that emotions register in the body as sensations. So, I may describe anxiety, but the question is, what does anxiety feel like in the body? Does it feel like tension? Does it feel like buzzing? If it had a color, what would it be? If it had a shape or a texture, what would it be? So this practice gets you more and more and more in touch. And in this practice, you have to write it down every time. So it's like you're becoming more and more and more and more aware. When you start doing that, so you take this inventory on your emotions will cease to be mute, and instead they become very intense. So the way I like to describe this is like in the beginning of learning how to surf, it's very difficult to feel the differences in water underneath the surfboard. You're just sort of confused as to why certain things are happening. But the better you get at it, the more you can sort of feel the way the water is under the surfboard and adjust accordingly. And that's exactly how it is when we turn into emotions. The more we do it, the easier it gets for us to go underneath it to whatever message, personal truth that emotion is trying to convey. That's my argument. Underneath every single emotion is a personal truth. So we start to access that emotional truth that's underneath the emotion, and based off of the awareness of that personal truth, we are able to make adjustments in our life. And when we start to flow in the direction of that, so we're making these adjustments, and becoming more and more and more aware, it's impossible for awareness not to increase and increase and increase and increase and increase. So it's it will be impossible for somebody to be limited to your physical time-space reality if they're on the path of awareness. It is an inevitable thing that these centers for perceiving, let's call it multidimensional realities, will become more and more and more and more intensified.
But what happens if we don't? What happens if we don't feel our emotions and feelings and we just continue to suppress them?
Oh my God. This is like a book I could write on this topic. The answer is so huge. It's down to what I said before, where if it's not going to be paid attention to on the emotional or mental level, then it will become a physical issue. And most people aren't recognizing that about chronic ailments, but it's the reason that we have such a poor track record of healing anything except for acute injury in the mainstream medical field. We don't know what the hell to do with chronic illness, because we don't understand that what's causing chronic illness is these emotional and mental states that we haven't done anything with. And so they've intensified and then magnified throughout the body. So that's one thing. You want to die of cancer? Go ahead, suppress your emotions. Another thing that it does with our lives is that we cannot make a single decision that is actually in alignment with our authentic truth. And the amount of damage you can do when you make your decisions based off of not your own authentic truth, I can't even freaking tell you. So like, let's say that you're little, you're taught to ignore your emotional guidance system. And so you do things because you should. You're doing them out of the reason that you think that it's actually going to feel better to comply to societal expectations. So let's say you've got a guy who doesn't really want to get married, but thinks that marriage is the right thing to do. So that's an inauthentic, it's not true to who he is, but he makes the decision, gets into a marriage. He's in that marriage for 15 years. Now he's 40. He realizes, crap, this is not really in alignment with who I am. Now he, goes off and has an affair. It ruins the marriage, destroys his kids' lives. So almost everything you look at in the world today is the result of suppressing emotion.
What are some steps that people can take to start feeling these emotions and releasing them?
The first thing that I would say to people who are terrified in that position is you can always go back to doing what you've always done. I mean, it's very simple. If you've got plenty of techniques to escape out of emotion. So it's almost like all of us, most of us, by the time that we get to this phase in our awakening process, we already know how to escape out of emotions. So use that as your safety net, Use the fact that you could just go turn on the television and distract yourself as your safety net. Now that you've got that as a backup, you can focus on learning to be a little bit uncomfortable. So the first practices that I would do is whenever you feel an intense emotion, find a chair to sit down in, close your eyes, and go towards the emotion instead. So it's almost like you're inviting it to take over your body. It's almost like a complete surrender. So instead of fighting it or arguing with it, you feel your fear going into it, but you let the sensations take over your whole body. It's what you were describing. It's the same kind of energy as if we're in an ocean wave and you completely lay back and let your whole body go loose and let the wave push you wherever it wants to. We're going to start doing that with emotions over and over again. So we start to see that we have the capacity to actually hold space for our own emotions. And after we do that for a while, these things have to be a practice for a while so that we're no longer in resistance when we feel them. After that is a process that you do, you can start to actually question the emotions. So once you have let them wash over you, you're asking the question, when did this emotion first arise? If this emotion had a message for me, what message would it be? It's almost like looking at what personal truth is underneath that emotion. And based off of noticing those thoughts that are actually underneath that particular emotion, then you have the key to maybe positive changes you have to make, steps you need to take, or else you are becoming aware of something you weren't aware of in yourself before. I would also encourage, people who can be present with you through the emotions. That's one of the most powerful things we can do. If you can get with somebody who can hold space for emotions, meaning they're not going to invalidate you when you feel it, when they're going to actually encourage the emotional state, we actually give ourselves more of a permission state to feel it. So I feel like this unconditional presence that we can give people in the state of emotion is one of the best ways to get people through it. So like if you're feeling grief, for example, I'd sit down with you and instead of being like, you just need to think about it differently. You need to think about it positively. That's me actually requiring you to get out of the emotion. I'm actually validating the way that you feel. It makes perfect sense to feel that way. And I'm almost walking you through the process of becoming aware of your emotion and seeing that there's something valid in the emotion and embracing the emotion instead of rejecting it.
We are all on our own journey. And, I love this concept of just sitting, feeling, allowing it to wash over you, almost like being a little bit of a detective and going, okay, well, what does that feel like for me? How does that feel in my body? What does that mean for me? What's the deeper truth? Like you said before, that deeper truth is, I don't want to be rejected. And unpacking it for yourself, I think that's really powerful and a great practice that we could all get into each day.
You want me to elaborate on something that I think will help people here?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so what we're getting into with people who make us feel broken for having emotions is actually shame deflection. So what people are actually meaning when they turn against your emotions is, I don't feel good with my own emotions. When you feel something, it makes me feel something, and I'm not okay with feeling something, so you're wrong for feeling something. That's what it is. And with shame deflection, we get into a sort of ping pong match, right? Where we actually feel insecure, but we don't want to face the fact that we feel the insecurity, so we make it the other person's problem. And then it becomes like this defense back and forth type of a thing. A typical argument looks like a ping pong match of shame deflection. So this is what has happened with emotions. So next time somebody shames you for your emotions, just remember it's not you that has a problem with not feeling. It's that person that has a problem with not feeling. And when you feel, they feel.
Wow, that's so powerful. Now, a lot of people like yourself have experienced this childhood abuse, either physically or emotionally, which you touched on before. And this trauma, if not released, could really be holding us back.
Mhm.
So, how do we heal childhood trauma and our inner child? Like, this is something that's really come up a lot lately
Mm.
in the spiritual world, but how do we heal this childhood trauma and our inner child? Where do we start?
I created a whole process for this. I called it the completion process. I actually didn't have the answer to that when I first got away. That's also part of what got me back into this type of spiritual work, because nobody had the answer. So I kind of had to go outside this dimension for the answers, if you catch my drift. What we need to do actually is to go back to the moment of trauma. Now, when we're feeling triggered, most of us who've gone through trauma, that's what we're dealing with in our adult life. It's what's making everything difficult, is that we have a trigger. Now, a trigger is nothing but an emotional flashback, just like a we think about a visual flashback, like a guy who goes to war comes back and he's got images of war constantly in his mind. That's a visual flashback. A trigger is an emotional flashback. If we look at things through the lens of your body never actually is against you and only ever does something in your best interests, then what is the purpose of a flashback? Obviously, it's to try to get your attention back towards something that is unresolved. So our answer about how to resolve it is to go in the alignment of what your body's asking you to do, and instead of try to get out of the trigger, go into the trigger. So this process that I created is developed that when you feel the trigger, you go into it almost like a wormhole opens up every time you feel that trigger, where you can go back to the original memory that is causing all of this issues. And by the way, before you do this process, you don't actually need to know these memories, because the visual aspect gets filled in with you following the emotional aspect of memory, which is what that trigger is. And based off of re-experiencing, but with your free will, that original traumatic experience, you can actually redo the entire thing. So you can create resolve within your own mind and within your own emotional body. And that trickles down to a shift in your physical body even. So I used to be in a position where I would hemorrhage actually every month, and I was able to completely get rid of it. So it's not just like mental and emotional triggers that start to be abated by this type of a process. You also have a lot greater awareness, shall I say, of what you actually needed in order to heal. And healing, of course, we overcomplicate this concept. To heal is to experience the opposite. It's literally that simple. So if I experience loneliness, to heal is to experience companionship. If I experience powerlessness, to heal is empowerment. So what we're going for when we're trying to create resolve is to experience the opposite of whatever we experienced. This is what we're headed towards doing in order to resolve trauma. And it's actually a lot. I mean, I don't want to say it's easy, because it's very difficult, obviously, on an emotional level to revisit these traumatic memories. But by revisiting them, they don't crop up again. They don't control your life the way that they did. And it's easier than people think, in that all people can do this work in this process.
What if you don't know what the situation was? Like, what if you can't remember, or
That's
you
why I
don't
did that.
know?
Well, that's like why I did this process, because most people. So let me explain memory. When you go through a trauma, memory is stored in a fragmented way. Fragmentation is actually the primary coping mechanism of a physical human. And so we fragment in terms of our personality, we fragment in terms of our consciousness, and memory fragments as well. So we store the visual aspect of memory separate from the emotional aspect of memory, separate from the auditory aspect of memory. Usually a person's emotional memory is stored the closest to the conscious mind, which is why we tend to get triggers, but with no context. This is why so many people who've been through trauma, it's like they're walking around like an emotional landmine. The example I like giving is almost that I like giving a lot is that you've got a girl who's walking down a deodorant aisle, and she has no conscious awareness of why she's suddenly having a panic attack. Now, we, from a higher perspective, may know that the deodorant she just passed was worn by the man that abused her, but she doesn't have that sort of visual aspect of memory. She just has the emotional aspect of memory. So when she smells the smell, it kicks off that emotion. She has no idea what memory it's linked to. I created this process specifically because that's how trauma is stored. People don't need to know what anything comes from in order to do this, because what we're working with is the trigger in the current moment. If you get a strong emotion, it links back to the other aspects of memory. So by using the emotional aspect of memory to go back in time, the let's say the auditory aspect fills back in, and so does the visual aspect fill back in, and we gain full awareness of that original event that we have suppressed.